Helen and Chester Zoo and Alina and all at Record as well. Thanks very much for inviting me to talk. It's normally us as Tanyptera hosting, because we host lots of webinars at the moment, but previously to workshops as well. So yeah, I work in the entomology department. Oh, let's just make sure that's going to the next slide. There we go. I work in the entomology department at World Museum in Liverpool, and I work on a project which is promoting the study and conservation of insects and other invertebrates in the Lancashire and Cheshire region. And there's just two of our staff, Leanna Dixon, who I think is also in the audience tonight, and myself. And we're sponsored by the Tanyptera Trust, which is a family trust, and it's a 7.5 year project at the moment. So it's extraordinary length for a project of this kind, and it's just amazing generosity. And it's really a partnership project, really. We work with lots of organisations across the Lancashire and Cheshire region, including Record and Chester Zoo with things like this. And that work with the local societies and the wildlife trusts and Natural England and many others really enable it for us to make the maximum impact. We have a project website where you can find out a lot more, where you can also see what events we're doing. As I said, we've got more workshops lined up on invertebrates, and hopefully by next spring we may possibly be back in the museum. And next summer we'll have another set of recording days where we'll be going again up and down Lancashire and Cheshire. We did manage to fit in our 10 days this year. We sort of squeezed them into August and beginning of September. We were able to catch up. But you can also look on the website to apply for a grant, and that is one of the criteria of that is associated with what I'm talking about tonight, the rare species, to sort of support your costs, really cover expenses for actually going and getting more data and learning more about these species and their distributions and even their biology. And you can also look at other resources on the website, such as atlases and checklists, ID resources. We've been working with Record very recently, actually. Well, Leanna has most recently with this, I think it's a beetle week this week, and there's different ID resources that they've been making, and you can look at those. If you just go on our social media feeds, then you can find out about those. We have a blog as well, particularly interesting sightings that you can contribute to that. But yeah, have a look at the website, and there'll be more on these rare species I'm going to talk about as well. There's not that many pages on those at the moment, but it will hopefully be increasing soon. So I'm not really going to say a great deal more about the project now, but you can ask me questions at any time, and I'd really advise you signing up to the newsletter to hear more about our events and how you can get involved. But as I go along through this talk, there'll be times where I'm talking about the work that we've done in terms of commissioning survey work, and it's really the findings of those that will come up quite a few times. So nationally rare and threatened invertebrates in Cheshire. So firstly, really, what is a nationally rare invertebrate? This is actually a status that is given through expert review. So in the last few years, there's really been a plethora of new invertebrate status reviews done at the national level, which have been commissioned by Natural England and done usually by a national expert. And so they collate all the records, and then they decide on the status of whether that is nationally rare or nationally scarce. And to qualify as a nationally rare invertebrate, there needs to be really only found between 1 to 15 hectares since 1990. But it's not as simple as just looking at a map and saying, oh yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's less than 15, it must be nationally rare. You also have to take into account whether that's believed to be breeding in all of those squares. Maybe it's a migrant. Maybe it's the national expert will judge it to be really under-recorded and thinks that if someone really looked, maybe it's hard to identify, then it would be found in many other places. So if they think that, they might give it a data deficient status. So they can't give it nationally rare or nationally scarce because it's just not very much known. Not enough known about it to be confident in that. So it really is. So it's not just about numbers, really. It's expert review as well to give it that status. And then for nationally scarce, it's the next level up, really, 16 to 100 hectares since 1990. And yeah, and that includes many hundreds or more species. You know, as soon as you get up to nationally scarce, you just have a sudden massive increase in numbers. So if we know what a nationally rare invertebrate is, then what is a threatened invertebrate? Because you can be rare but not threatened, and so to be threatened, they do this in the national reviews at the same time. And it's done using the IUCN guidelines. That's the International Union for the Conservation of Nature guidelines, and it's done at the regional level. So for this country, not for the whole world. So the 3 categories then we're really interested in for this country is vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered. And those are the only things we're sort of interested in tonight in terms of what a threatened invertebrate is. So they often have a category of near threatened, so that means it's not threatened, but it could be if things change. So we're going to be really focusing on those vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered species, and I'll maybe mention some things that have gone extinct as well. I'll just go for an example to sort of help you understand. So this here is the Cheshire horsefly. It only occurs in Cheshire. It has been recorded in Shropshire as well at Wixall and Fens mosses, but not for quite a few decades. And so this was within the review that took place in 2017, a review of the status of the larger Brachycera flies of Great Britain by Martin Drake, and he would have used these criteria. So it was classed as endangered, and because it had to come under, as long as it meets one of these criteria for A to E for endangered, then it will be classed endangered. So it just has to meet one from A, B, C, D, E. It just has to apply to one, and then it can be classified as endangered. So within that, Martin Drake has decided that the criteria B for endangered, and endangered, this goes down here along this line here. This is the sort of endangered, and he decided it fits for that. So the area of occupancy, so it occurs on less than, well, far less than 500 kilometers squared. And the number of locations is, in fact, 3. And it's also been observed as declining. It used to occur at 5, and yeah, now we're down to 3 sites, and that's in just 2 hectads. So it's shown clear decline historically. So therefore it's classified as endangered, and the fact that it's been recorded, yeah, in only very few locations, only 3 that it occurs in, known to occur now. It's very clearly nationally rare. So this is nationally rare and endangered. And at the time, it was for our survey, it was thought maybe it had gone extinct. So just to look at the proportion in Cheshire, really, of nationally rare or threatened invertebrates versus everything else terrestrial and aquatic. And these are very rough numbers, because there's lots of things that haven't yet been recorded. And as many of you will be aware, there's lots of different data sources. Record will have probably a big majority of the data, but there's always data that makes things incomplete. And there's also lots of, and it's very hard to say how many rare and threatened species there are if there hasn't been a recent review of things, or maybe since a review, things have very clearly changed a lot. Maybe a species has expanded a lot, and it probably won't be classed as a nationally rare species anymore. So it's quite hard to give an exact figure, but very clearly it's an absolutely tiny fraction, the nationally rare and threatened species within the county. I put there 7,850 species in total, and just around 25 of those are nationally rare and threatened. So we're really talking about the absolute rarities, not just the things that you really hardly come across at all, maybe nationally scarce things. There's quite a few of those, even if they might be very rare in Cheshire. We're talking about national rarities that Cheshire must have something special about it for it to only occur in a few places, including Cheshire. And I want to make that distinction between nationally rare and threatened things. I'm not talking about legally protected species tonight, but there is one legally protected species under Section 5 of the Wildlife Countryside Act, and that's a lesser silver water beetle, and that's protected from intentional killing or injuring, from taking, from some damaging its habitat, really. And this was a species that has had historical declines, but has since been found to be more widespread, especially in Cheshire. And you can see that map there. They actually found it for all the atlas work, amazing amount of work for the Cheshire Water Beetle Atlas. They found it in 33 tetrads, and it's found in well over 15 hectares. So it's, in the most recent review, it's not actually a nationally rare insect. It would have been previously, but it's also classified, not even classified as threatened. So it's not nationally rare or threatened, but it is protected, which is quite an unusual thing. That is showing the eggs distinctive. I don't know if you can see my mouse, actually. I'm presuming you can. I hope you can. So I'm showing the egg mass here, which is quite distinctive. But one thing that this water beetle is that other national rarities sort of have an advantage of, is that this beetle isn't found in many protected sites, whereas most of the species I'm going to talk about are found in really habitats that are under the ownership of the Wildlife Trust or Natural England, and so they're sort of managed for conservation, whereas this beetle occurs in most of its places and not protected. So there you go. And then also in Cheshire, we have a snail which is listed on Annex 2 of the Habitats Directive. So European protection, but it's not sort of protection as in from if someone came along and took loads of them away or something. It's protected in terms of what the UK is supposed to sort of do about it if they have them. And the UK has got a big proportion of this species, I believe. And so it's supposed to be, you're supposed to reply to the European Commission, I think it is, as it should be designated by the European Union as a site of community importance. And then if it is adopted by the European Union, sites where it occurs, then the UK then have a sort of a time limit to make those sites SACs, special areas of conservation, European designation. So, but the sites where it does occur in Cheshire, Coisley Meres and Chapelmere, they're not SACs at the moment. So I don't really know if there's a process, or whether they've been assessed and they haven't been deemed sort of good enough to apply for this sort of SAC status. But obviously that wouldn't happen now with us having left the European Union. But again, this snail is not nationally rare. There's quite a few sites in the south, and so it wouldn't qualify for that. But it is vulnerable under the latest review. So I'm now going to get into the nationally rare and threatened invertebrates, and I've really picked out 4 of the sort of the main broad habitats where almost all of the really rare things occur. So these habitats are, you know, outstanding in a national context. So we're going to have a look at the wood pasture, really, which I'm talking about the parks in Dunham, Massey, for example, which I know is in Greater Manchester, but is in Vice County 58, Cheshire, from a biological recording point of view. There's others like Tatton Park, and they're very important for saprosylex, for deadwood invertebrates. And then I'm going to talk probably the most important habitat for national rarities in Cheshire are the meres and mosses. The sand dunes of the Wirral Coast used to be, and then perhaps the river shingle species is perhaps where the under-recorded thing is, but there's some very good stretches of river with lots of potentially rarity supporting habitats there. So we're going to go through these. And firstly, I wanted to talk about Wynbunbury Moss, because this is probably the most important site in Cheshire for nationally rare species. It is quite an extraordinary place. It's in it, but it's only very small. It's about 23.3 hectares. It's a lowland raised bog in sort of southeast Cheshire, and it has it's sort of a pristine quaking bog, which means it was formed like all the meres and mosses from the glacial retreat and drift, which sort of created depressions, and they filled up with peat, and some of them are turned into sphingmore mosses, so they sort of tremble and bounce. And Wynbunbury and Chartley moss and Staffordshire and Brookhouse moss have a unique formation within all those other mossland sites in terms of something to do with the rocks and subsidence underneath, which has left, you know, it's about 13 meters of water underneath a meter or two peat raft. So when you're standing on it, you're really standing on a lake underneath. And Wynbunbury Moss was on Charles Rothschild's 1915, so 100 years ago, list of sites in the UK sort of worthy of preservation, and that's got 284 sites on it. This sort of national list of sites. So from a very long time ago, it was identified as very important, and it was in sort of one of the very earliest triple SIs to be designated in 1951 under the the National Parks and Access to the Countryside Act in 1949. And then it was acquired by the state in the 1950s. So they could see that it was really getting wooded, as I understand it, but they came to the rescue, and it was bought, and it's now managed by Natural England as a national nature reserve, and it is certainly of national importance. And that's where it is. You can see the orange circle there. Can someone just tell me, you are seeing the mouse when I'm sort of pointing things out?
Yes, Gary.
Good, thank you. One sort of intro. I went to Wynbunbury yesterday, actually, because I'd never been there before, and to meet the site manager, because there's quite a bit we'd like to do on there as a centre project, hopefully, in the future. But they have a church there where it's, because of this subsidence on the ground, the church has fallen down, apart from the clock tower, which is leaning. It's famous for its leaning clock tower, Wynbunbury. But it sort of goes off every 15 minutes. So when you're probably doing field work, it's you can probably keep to time there. It's quite strange hearing it go off. But so thinking of Wynbunbury, it's not just the sort of the center of the bog that it's important. What is quite special about Wynbunbury is it's got the transitional vegetation into the bog as well, and then it's got fen and carr woodland around it. So this is a staphylinid beetle, a rove beetle, and this is associated with reed-bed litter and also sphagnum bogs. And it was first found in Wynbunbury in 2003 by Derek Lott, the late Derek Lott, and he's it's one of the most recent sites actually to be found, because there are very few records of it in the UK. There's no recent status review of this, but it would have been rare, and it's very likely that it's still nationally rare. And I expect it will be given a threat status, but that review of the staphylinid, of this group of staphylinids, is being written at the moment. But it's historically, it has been recorded in Delamere Forest, on the mosses there, and in the Broads in Norfolk and Cambridgeshire, I think, fens over there. So this particular specimen you're looking at is from 1909 at Abbott's Moss in Cheshire. But what Wynbunbury has is this is a nationally rare invertebrate, which is not necessarily on the bog. It can be found in the fen around it. So if we're thinking about the fen as being important, and we move a bit closer to the bog, in between one of the main fen areas and the bog, there's sort of a carr woodland, and in there you find a nationally rare caddisfly called Anabolia brevipennis, and it has these very distinctive shaped cases. They're sort of triangles, and we don't know why that's the case. Maybe it's to help stop it rolling around, or to help it get more sun. But Ian Wallace, I don't think, it's all sort of theory about why, but it's quite distinctive, and that is found in this carr woodland, and you can see, I keep pointing to the screen, of course it's not going to work. So in these small pools here, where which are filled up with dead leaves, and then they make these holes, and that's what they're feeding on. And Anabolia hadn't been seen at Wynbunbury since 1998. And in fact, over 20 years for any of the Cheshire sites. It's also found at Hatchmere, and Ian Wallace had a look for it in 2018, supported by a Invertebrate Project grant, sort of to cover expenses to do that, to check the Cheshire sites to see if it's still there. And yeah, it is still at Hatchmere in the Carr woodland there, but he didn't find it at Danes Moss, which is the other Cheshire site. So I think in the most recent national review, it's found in 9 hectads, in 10 kilometre squares in this country. So that's classed as nationally rare and vulnerable. But I think Ian thinks it's doing okay at Wynbunbury. And there it is again in the water. It's making these very round holes. But I think it's yeah, it's quite. It's just because it is so distinctive. It's something that doesn't need the expertise of Ian to sort of identify. So I think Ian had planned to do a training day at Wynbunbury for volunteers to be able to survey for this, but because of this unusual year, it didn't go ahead. But I hopefully he's planning to sort of reschedule that for next year. So look out for that if you're interested. So then moving from the woodland into the sort of the transitional sort of scrub before you get onto the moss, and sort of on the edges of the moss really. Is where you find the 10-spotted pot beetle, and I know that a couple of you at least have seen that from what I heard in the beginning. Josh and Eric at least been to Wynbunbury and seen this. I think it's doing quite well there at the moment. Cryptocephalus beetles, they're leaf beetles, and it's quite a rare genus. I think there's about 20 species in the genus in this country, and many of them are rare. And this one is preferred food plant is sallows, and I think grey willow is particularly, but it can eat birch as well. And then the larvae will eat the fallen leaves in the leaf litter, and that's where they'll live. And that's probably where the importance of the habitat is, because obviously if they're just doing the whole life cycle on the trees, then that's not particularly rare. They're not, sallows are not rare trees, but it's the underneath, it's the conditions underneath that are probably very important. And with this one, in the 2004 review of the leaf beetles, this was classified as nationally rare and endangered. This is the only English site for this species. It used to occur at Chartley Moss in Staffordshire, which probably went extinct there in the 1980s. In mid-Ayrshire as well in Scotland, I think it's disappeared from, but it still occurs in Rannoch in Scotland. It's certainly an extremely rare beetle, and so it really likes seems like the edge of the bog there. And I'm just showing you here what Rupert Randall, who's the reserve manager, was sort of just would say is the ideal sort of plant. It doesn't want coppiced willows in particular. Rupert's saying it likes the self-set plants, and particularly young ones. It's sort of, I think mid-June is a good time to see it, but I don't think you can, I think you have to get permission from Rupert, I think, to actually go onto the moss. It's locked. So I don't think you'll be able to see this by just sort of turning up. It's been quite well studied at Wynbunbury Moss. Someone called Ross Piper did 3 years of reports there, where he was actually been counting them. He was counting a few thousand and across the moss. But in 1992, I think it was, it got really quite rare at the site, and 95%. At the time, 95% of the UK population was at Wynbunbury. They estimated, and only 5% at Rannoch. So almost all of the UK population was at Wynbunbury, and then 75% of the population at Wynbunbury was on this tree. So then you're talking about 71% of the UK population of this species was on this sallow here. So that's pretty amazing. I don't think this particular tree is used so much by the beetle now. I think it's got a bit old, is what Rupert was saying. But it was I think when it got to that point, it was sort of helped. It doesn't move around the site very well at all. When they've done these release recapture surveys and marking them, they don't seem to actually mix between the different areas of sallows across the site. So they moved it to a few. They sort of helped it move to a few different areas of the site, and it seems to be doing very well. They've planted more sallows, and I think at the moment it's doing really well. But it hasn't been. I don't think there's been any count since 2015 now. Obviously, the site manager and others, I'm sure, are sort of making sure it's still there each year. Maybe in a 2-year cycle. There's a suggestion that it's sort of one of those sort of separate populations. So 1 year it's doing really well, and then the next year there's hardly any of them. But I think the biology is not brilliantly known in terms of perhaps they depending on the conditions, they may be able to delay a year, but I'm not sure that's well known at all. So if we move on to the moss itself, we have it's dominated really in terms of rarities by the spiders, and this is a jumping spider, Psittacus floricula, and this is a species that we commissioned a survey for in 2017 to cover the landscape, really the Cheshire Plain landscape of as many of the bogs as possible. We'll look to this is for Richard Gallen. It was looking at all the bogs where it's been historically recorded, which was 21 bogs. 17 of those bogs were still intact bogs, and 16 of them were surveyed. I think one of them they couldn't get access to, and they found it's still occurring at 11 of those. But then he also found 2 new sites for it, so it's certainly at 13 bogs in the Cheshire Plain. And this is one of them that is associated with the sphagnum mosses, and Psittacus particularly likes to go into the common cotton grass heads. So you get lots of females in these heads where they lay their eggs, and then you get one male which will be sort of below them, I think, and it sort of defends its females there. So that's quite interesting. But really the survey, Richard wasn't just going to be looking for this one species. This was this survey really turned up at many other rare things, and in fact Psittacus is an actually rare species, but it's not threatened. It's near threatened. And so whilst he was finding this, and he found it at Wynbunbury Moss, it was still there as one of its sites for Psittacus. But while he was doing it, he uses this a vacuum sampler. So it's quite disturbing actually. If you're on a nice peaceful nature reserve, it's like a lawnmower going off, really. And he sucks up the sphagnum, and it is amazingly efficient compared to sort of what I used to do by hand, sort of sieving through sphagnum. But he was able to find this Knapfosia nigerrima, which is bigger than Psittacus. This is, I think, goes up to sort of 9 millimeters, which may sound quite small, but there's a lot of spiders that are smaller than this, and for arachnologists should be reasonably obvious. Which is why it was strange that it wasn't found until 1994 through a Liverpool Museum survey. We're looking for another rare spider there. Chris Felton, who still volunteers at the museum, found this in pitfall traps, which were set amongst the sphagnum, and that was new to Britain at the time, and it's still the only site in the UK for this species. So it's a Wynbunbury speciality. But in 2017, when Richard was doing his survey for Psittacus, he did across the moss. He did 7 sampling points where he would wait for 2 minutes at each one with his vacuum. So it's quite a standardized way, and he found this species at 6 out of the 7 sampling points. So it seems to be doing very well at Wynbunbury, which is obviously really good news if it's the only site in the country. But this is nationally rare and vulnerable. It's classed as from the recent review of spiders. And then another nationally rare and vulnerable spider at Wynbunbury. This time, this is a really tiny money spider. This is only up to about 1.3 millimeters long. So, yeah, you'd hardly see it. And the immatures will be even smaller than that. So this has only got 2 UK sites, and Wynbunbury is where it's really most abundant. So it also occurs at Fens and Wixall in Shropshire, and it's been found also a Bettesfield moss by Richard for the first time. So that's the first Welsh records, and that's attached to the Fens and Wixall complex. So that was really good news. But it seems to be at Wynbunbury is where it's common, and it was found in every sampling point in the 2017 survey. So again, that was really good news. But this is the only 2 sites in the whole country for this, and one of them is Wynbunbury, where it seems to do very well. At Bettesfield moss, it seems to occur in these hummocks within the moss, so a raised area which is then surrounded by water. And Richard comments that it's a sort of sheltered area, but it's also very humid with all the water surrounding it, and that's what it seems like at Bettesfield. So I'm just learning a bit more about the ecology of it. So yeah, yet another nationally rare spider which occurs at Wynbunbury is this Glyphesis cotonae, which is even smaller than the Cararita limnea, which the previous species. This I think only goes up to 0.9 millimeters. So this is absolutely tiny. And during the 2017 survey, this was found at 6 new sites. This is probably because it's so small, with the modern technique of using the vacuum sampler has probably helped a lot in sort of detecting the species. This maybe likes the sort of the wetter zones of the spring more. sorry. So that's the some of the spiders of Wynbunbury. You know, you do well to have a really nice nature reserve and have one nationally rare species in it. You know, you have to normally have to be a pretty special place just to have one. So that's just the nationally rare spiders. So if we move on to another, this is a nationally rare and endangered insect at Wynbunbury. This is the Cheshire Horsefly that I mentioned already. And this was the subject of another commission survey we did this time in 2018. And we got Andrew Grayson from Yorkshire to do that for us. And he really searched far and wide in the Cheshire Plain and went even into Staffordshire for Chartley moss, and really covered as much ground as possible to see where it occurred, because this, as I said, was thought that it may have gone extinct. Hadn't been seen in this country at all since 1999. Hadn't been seen at Wynbunbury Moss since 1969. Yeah, Andrew found it. It's still at Wynbunbury, and it's at Little Budworth Common, which is probably the most important site for it, because I think it occurs at 3 separate bogs at Little Budworth Common. So it'll have seem to have got a strong population there. And this horsefly, I think, is about 6 or 7 millimeters long, so it's probably fairly similar to the ones that you see biting, you see on your arm. But there's no records, probably because it's so rare, of this one actually taking, the females taking blood meals. And strangely also, it didn't turn up in any of the traps that were set. So we set Manitoba traps. This is what one looks like. And these are set to resemble, this is like like a Swiss ball that you use in the gym. You sit on to do exercises. It's like one of those hung up, and it swings about in the wind. So and because it's black, it really heats up. So it's supposed to look like a mammal moving about, so that the females are attracted to it to get the blood meal before they lay their eggs. And one of these was set at Cheshire Moss, where the horsefly occurs, and right near where even I saw one of the horseflies, and it didn't catch any of the target species in these Manitoba traps. So I don't know, the ecology of it is not well known. The larvae are undescribed, but it's strongly associated with these acid mires. The other nationally rare species that Andrew was looking for didn't show up. Another horsefly. But it's great that this is not going extinct. It still occurs at 3 sites, and they are all in Cheshire. This really is truly a Cheshire species. Although obviously it's not just the UK it occurs in. It's fairly northern. It occurs in Scandinavia as well, and other places, but generally northern distribution in Europe. And these are just show the sites that Andrew visited, all these different bog sites. And it was sort of unfortunately he hasn't found it at Fens and Wixall, but it hasn't been seen there since 1980. But that's possible that it still occurs there. It's a very large site, so hopefully it's still hanging on there as well. So if we now move closer to the Delamere Forest bogs, we have Hog's Head moss, which is sort of between the Abbott's Moss complex and the forest itself. So it's probably quite an important stepping stone. But this site has no SSSI status, and I don't even know if it's a local wildlife site. Perhaps Eric or one of the record team can tell me at the end. This is a very, it's got a good condition bog, but it's privately owned. It's not under a conservation body, and I think it was for sale. I don't know if it still is. But if anyone's got a spare few 100,000 knocking about, then this would be a really good site to acquire and conserve and manage for its nature. And so this was one of the sites that Andrew Grayson was looking for the horsefly. But obviously, again, he wasn't just completely focused on the two target species he had. He was, he's a very good entomologist, and he was recording lots of other species. And one of them is this, what I would call the Cheshire Horsefly. So this is Orthonevra intermedia, and it's associated with bogs. But it was only recorded new to the UK by Martin Drake in his Delamere survey in 2003. And he found it at a couple of sites, including Barnesbridge Basin and then Norley Moss, which is on the edge of Hatchmere, 2003. But Andrew found it at a further 3 sites during his survey, including, I think one or two went into a Manitoba trap at Black Lake, which is one of the very well-known bogs within the forest itself. So I think that this one is now known from 5 bogs in Delamere, and this is the only, again, this is the only UK sites for this hoverfly, and very little is known, I think, about its biology and its status in this country. So when they did the most recent review of hoverflies, Stuart Ball and Roger Morris, I think, it was classified as data deficient, because they were obviously not confident that that all the breeding populations have been found, and maybe it is more widespread. But it is, the fact that it was only found for the first time 17 years ago is probably going to be a nationally rare thing once in another review, when there's perhaps the data is more solid. It's a good candidate for further study. So if we move right into the Delamere Forest now, this is the white-faced darter. I'm not going to talk too much about this one because it's had it's probably had the most publicity amongst the Cheshire's rare invertebrates. So you probably know quite a bit about it already. But I think it may be disputed, but it became extinct in Cheshire in roughly 2002. And the last place for it was Black Lake. And in 2013, the Cheshire Wildlife Trust, and I think working in partnership with the British Dragonfly Society and probably the Forestry Commission and Natural England, I don't know exactly, but I think they commissioned some work on, to consider a reintroduction, and Doolittle Pool within the forest was chosen as a reintroduction site for it. So they in 2013 they started moving masses of sphagnum, which would have had eggs in it, and larvae from 2 sites, so Chartley Moss in Staffordshire and Wixham Fens Mosses. These are both sites where there's lots of the white-faced darter, and so those were the donor sites. And then I think the last of those translocations, they were every year up until 2017 they were introducing more larvae and eggs into Doolittle Pool. and then they've been monitoring the numbers that have been coming out through counting the exuvae, and that's the best way really to be monitoring rare dragonflies, because having that skin is basically telling you that they've been able to get through their whole life cycle, so that the habitat is suitable. Although obviously in this case, if they've started their lives somewhere else like Chartley Moss, then perhaps that's not important. But going forward, you can tell that they've gone through the whole life cycle, and so that, and say another couple of sites, there's not that many sites in the UK for this, has declined massively really with the loss of suitable areas, but there's at least a couple of sites in Cumbria. Scalby moss is one of those, and I used to be involved in helping to count the exuvae, and we used to find, I don't know, up to 2,000 or 3,000, I think, and you just collect all the skins, and they're easy to count. They're easy to see and find. But in this particular, in Doolittle Pool is very big, and I can imagine it was a really devil to find the exuvae in there. But they have been finding them in low numbers, since the translocations, and I think this year. And I think last year were the first time where there would have been any exuvae find would have done the whole life cycle at Delamere, as opposed to starting it from one of the donor sites. And so this is them in waders trying to find the exuvae to count them. This is Wildlife Trust and volunteers. At Scalby, the pools are so small that you just have to sort of just around the edge of them, and it's much easier. But it's very good news this year, because I think for the first time since it went extinct at Black Lake, that 2 males were spotted at Black Lake this year. This isn't very far in distance from Doolittle Pool, but they managed to get from the reintroduction site across to one of their old haunts, the most recent old haunts. So hopefully Black Lake will be becoming suitable again for the dragonfly, and it will start to breed there again. But that's really great news. Leaving Delamere Forest and going into sort of the far northeast Cheshire at Holcroft Moss. So we're still on the Meres and Mosses here. This is it's right near the sort of the M62 and M6 there, only just about in Cheshire. And this site is a Cheshire Wildlife Trust site, but it's another special bog basically, and Tanyptera nigricornis has been recorded there, but that used to be a nationally rare insect, and it's still classified as that in the most recent review, because there hasn't been a very recent cranefly review. But now I suspect, because of looking at the recent records of distribution, it will probably be classed as nationally scarce now. You can just see there in the antennae there, and that makes up the logo of the Tanyptera Trust. So have a look at it. That's where it comes from. Anyway, very striking. These the Tanyptera will be on the edge of the mosses, in the deadwood, in the birch, in exposed areas, I think. But this is another site where there's very rare spiders there, and it's got a couple of species that are not at Wynbunbury. So Rich Birkmeyer did a survey of some of the Lancashire and Cheshire North Cheshire bogs in 2018. I'm pretty sure 2018, and that was another sort of Tanyptera Project supported survey through the grant scheme. And at Holcroft Moss, there was an old record from the year 2000 from Alan Scott, who sadly has passed away, and we don't know where the voucher is. So the record for this species at Holcroft Moss would have been the only English site. So without the voucher, it wasn't, couldn't be confirmed, that site. But when Rich went there, he managed to find it, and so that was the first confirmed English site, and so that record from the year 2000 is sort of being reinstated, and it's since been found at Fens and Wixell, I think. So there's sort of 2 English sites, and then there's some in Scotland as well. This is another nationally rare and vulnerable spider associated with the sphagnum bog. And even more sort of exciting was the finding of a new species to the UK during Rich's survey of Sibianolare, and it remains the only extant site known, despite all the intensive surveys of the Delamere Forest and wider Cheshire Plain bog surveys. And this got into the news. That clip there is from the Independent, and it's quite an interesting story, because it was thought, when Rich found it, he thought it was something else, which is found in southern England in a slightly different habitat, Sibiano orosinctus. And so when they went back, he went back with, I think, Richard Gallen, and they both had samples, and then they sort of realized it was something else, and they realized they were thinking it was this species, and they actually, when they were telling each other excitedly, it sort of crossed in the emails at exactly the same time. And they then sent the samples to Dmitry Logunov at Manchester Museum. He's the creator of arthropods there, and Dmitry is an expert spider taxonomist and describes new species and new genesis, and so it's just the right man to have on your doorstep, really, to be able to confirm these. And he actually described the genus Sibianor as I think new to science at the time, not that long ago, and so and he described this species as well. So when you have the person who actually describes a species, he is the world authority, and so samples were sent to him to check, well, is this really something that has never been recorded in Britain? And at the time, they were sort of thinking, well, is there any other things that were identified as a different Sibianor in museum collections? And in Liverpool, we had this specimen from, we had a couple of specimens actually, 1924 specimens from Faulkner, from Kirkby Moss, which doesn't exist anymore, has been destroyed. So these went to Dmitry as well. And they all turned out to be what they thought they had, a new species in the UK. So it has actually been here, all the time. It was here in 1924. And there's also another site that they think they're confident it would have been at, because it was another site where Sibianor orosinctus was recorded at Barton Moss, which is about 5 kilometres northeast of Holcroft. And so, although there's no specimen for that one, it would have been, it's very likely it would have been this species, but Barton moss has also been destroyed, so we're still down to one site. And this is really just to show, this would have been the Kirkby moss area would have been here. And this is between Manchester and Liverpool. This is where they all used to be lowland peatlands. So in fact, Holcroft over here used to be an awful lot bigger, but the area of which Holcroft moss is now is pretty rare in Cheshire as one of the only places where it's never been cut for peat, and that's probably why it holds on to these rarities. But yeah, it used to be much larger, and you can just see really how much Barton moss would have been somewhere up here. But there is very little left compared to what there was. So I'm going to move along. I don't know what the time is or anything. I don't know the time, but you can let me know. This talk may be much longer than lots of time. So I've said we could always do a part 2 another day, or if we want to just have a break, just let me know, record people. But I'll carry on for now anyway. So from the sort of the bad news of what used to occur in terms of the extent of peatland and the lost Sibian or Larave sites, there's more sort of bad news in terms of what used to occur on the Wirral coast, where this is a photo from 1882 at Wallasey, and this is what it used to look like, and it used to be host of many rare species, including this beetle is in the dung beetle family, but it only occurs on very sort of dynamic sand dunes without much vegetation at all, virtually dunes without vegetation, and it used to occur over 100 years ago at Wallasey. There's many specimens in the museum from around that time, but it's only really, it's an endangered species itself. It's only hanging on in Britain, and I did a survey of it this year on the Sefton coast, and it still occurs there, but it's only 3 sites for it in the UK, but that's gone. But I'm with the Wirral coast and extinctions. I'll go through a couple, but I'm going to focus on the Lepidoptera there. And yeah, this is, I don't know if you can use this image. If the video of this talk was going to go online, I had to just take it from the internet because I couldn't find anything from what I see. But this is sort of what it looks like now, and there's basically no sand dune accretion, so you just lose a lot of the sand dune species. This is the most recent loss, really, of the rare Lepidoptera that used to occur on the Wirral, and this needs loose sand. Really, it's uses sand couch. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but I'm sure Josh will tell me later on. But this hasn't been seen since 2013, the sandhill rustic, and it's a subspecies that would be nationally rare. As a species, it's probably, it may be nationally scarce or something. There's quite a few areas along the coast of the UK where it does still occur. But Ian Wallace have been looking for this every year, really, most years between 1996 and 2012. You know, he was finding it every year, but he hasn't. He hadn't seen it for a couple of years, and the habitat he thinks is just no longer good enough. It's just too stabilized and invaded by other grasses, and it's just not suitable any year. It became restricted to the Hoylake end, and this is the the couch grass is the sort of the pale stuff, but it's yeah, I think it's just become too solid, really, in it for the moth. So we think that's gone extinct, but it could possibly be hanging on. You know, we'd cover the expenses for a project sort of looking for it, still on our priority list. Just looking quickly at the other losses, really, and 3 of them at least are creeping willow feeders. This is Anacampus temerella, a little galecid micromoth that hasn't even been seen on the Sefton coast, where there's lots of creeping willow for a very long time, but is still at St Anne's, further north in Lancashire. But the creeping willow, I think Josh has done recent plant surveys, and I think that creeping willow is quite rare, really, now. But you can correct me, Josh, later. But these are Formby examples of the grass egger here. This is the caterpillars of the grass egger, and this is a Portland moth. These are pretty nationally scarce moths, and they still occur on the Sefton coast, but it's been many decades since they've been on the Wirral coast. This is another one that's been lost, not seen since 1926 on the Wirral coast, but it's actually been lost from the whole of the UK mainland. It only occurs on the Isle of Man now. It's associated with thyme, and on there's parts of the Isle of Man where it's sort of carpeted with thyme, and it's still occurring there. But I think, again, thyme is become a rare plant on the Wirral, and it's obviously not good enough to support this moth anymore. And Belted Beauty, you know, the emblem of the Lancashire and Cheshire Entomological Society, hasn't been seen now on the Wirral coast for 10 years. Where these moths were photographed is now a caravan site, but this would be a nationally rare moth, but it still occurs in North Lancashire. But it's restricted to coastal grasslands. It often eats kidney vetch, but it will eat creeping willow as well, and other things. That's the female there, wingless female grub, and so the moth, you know, doesn't have incredible dispersal abilities. It's probably more down to the larval movement. I don't know if they do the ballooning or anything, but yeah, it's very likely now extinct. So the wood pasture in Parkland, which is a UK BAP habitat, we have some of these old parklands in northeast Cheshire. As I've said, Dunham Massey is in Greater Manchester, but Rice County 58. And this is one of really a classic example of a very old parkland where it's been wooded since it's had lots of old trees since the Middle Ages. Really, it's got many old oaks in particular. It's dominated by, but it's historically had many rare deadwood invertebrates, particularly beetles, that have been recorded there. These are a couple of examples. The Trinodes hirtus, I don't think it's been recorded there since 1988, but that is associated with spiders that build tunnel building spiders under the bark, and it sort of lives in those and eats the sort of detritus, dead insects and things. This species on the right, Dinoptera calaris, is extinct in the UK now, but again, that would have occurred there, you know, going back probably 100 years or so. Yeah, Trinoides, it needs to be large ancient trees where that occurs on. And Keith Alexander, who's is a very well-known saprosylic specialist, yeah, had only found one, I think, of the 6 red data book species beetles that have been recorded there historically, although some of those may be no longer nationally rare. Less recorded have been the flies, the deadwood flies at Dunham, and we were hoping to do quite a major saprosylic survey there because one has not been done there for over 10 years. But we obviously the pandemic has stopped that, but we'll hopefully next year that'll happen. We'll have someone really focusing on the flies because they're just less studied, and yet these 3 species, though the one I'm actually referring to is Mazida britannica, but I couldn't find one online that I could use, so I've just borrowed this one just because it will look quite similar to the untrained eye, and the same with these. I could, because of rarities, I couldn't actually find pictures of them that I could use, or I couldn't find a picture at all. But for 3 species, so that's, I'll try and say these. Heteromerigenia nigromania. There's only a few sites for that. Yeah, the Mazida is known as the freeloader fly. There's very few sites for that. That's in rot holes. And then this Sciarid, which I'm probably saying that wrong as well, is a Cythropotra quericola. And that's, I think, only been found at one other site in the country. So there's definitely a very important Diptera fauna associated with deadwood there as well. But the list of those is much shorter than the beetles, really, because it's much less studied. But there's probably still quite a lot to be found at Dunham. But it is one of the top sites in the country for deadwood invertebrates. And then there's other areas in Cheshire which will probably be important as well that haven't been studied yet. So there's probably, perhaps once we've done a survey, I could probably go into whole talks on different habitats in themselves, but I'll touch on river shingle as well, which is a really under-recorded habitat nationwide, and there hasn't been a great deal of work done in Cheshire on the river shingle, despite you've got really good bits of river shingle on the Bollin and the Dane and the Weaver. And so in 2006, I think it was Bates and Drake did a survey of the beetles and Diptera in Cheshire rivers, and then in 2007-8, Stephen Hewitt and John Parker were looking for a particular stiletto fly, which is a BAP species, and this is the places they were looking for it. That stiletto fly they were looking for is now nationally scarce. It's probably their fault, really. They've found a number of new sites for it.
Gary, can I just ask how much longer your talk is? We're just worried about questions at the end, and people are dropping out, so we just want some time at the end for some questions.
Yeah, I'll right, 5 minutes. I'll whiz through.
Thank you.
Okay. But during that survey from Steve Hewitt and John Parker, they found this very rare fly, which has only been found in a few sites. But in the 2005 review of this group of flies, high-bottids, it was thought to be possibly extinct, hadn't been seen since 1911. But this was classed as data deficient, but probably in a new review would probably be rare, and that's where it was found in Newton Hall on the River Bollin, and that you can see there is where that was found. I've just put soft rock cliffs in because we have there, you know, there's really quite impressive habitat there on the Wirral, at the sort of the Thursterton area. But I don't think any really particularly rarities have ever been found there. But again, it's somewhere where we've commissioned work. We'll hopefully start next year there. But I would regard that as some very important habitat within Cheshire. And then this is Chloe's bee that she found at the Cheshire Zoo Nature Reserve. There's a blog about that on the Northwest Invertebrates website, so I'll leave that there. This is a small egger moth. I'm talking about species that are away from those special habitats, and that was last found in 1995 in southwest Cheshire. And the thing to look out for with this one is sort of rugby ball sized webs, the larvae are gregarious in about mid-June, and maybe that still occurs. There's also a snail associated with the canals in East Cheshire, very much an endangered species, but hasn't been seen since 1972. This is Bromius obscurus, a leaf beetle that occurs in East Cheshire, in the sort of Congleton areas, being found in a few sites now, a couple of new sites in the past year or so. But that's a critically endangered species which we've commissioned work for, and there will be a report soon on the findings of that, which Don Senhouse has been doing. It uses rose bay willow herb, and that's the sort of feeding signs you can see there. And yeah, quite conspicuous really. And oh, here we go, we're at the last one, and this is a subterranean species of spider that has occurred at Pickering's pasture in 1989. I think there's a couple of records that might be wrong that were for Cheshire, but see, little of the biology is known for this one, but it's a very rare thing. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll just quickly say that we're continuing to encourage further study of the status and distribution of biology of these rare things through commission work in the grant scheme, and encouraging more information sharing in terms of the records of these things. And we want the species to be included in management plans where they occur, and perhaps added as special features of triple SIs. And I'll stop there. And sorry for, I have no idea what time it is. Maybe it's only half.